Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're doing well, and I feel bad for anybody that's not under the circumstances. So, one thing I'd like to do right up front, because I was a volunteer for many years at a conference, is I'd like to thank all the volunteers that do all the work to put this on. So, let's give them a round of applause. So I'm going to try to take you on a trip through memory lane here. I've been trying to recreate that experience, that first moment. You always remember your first, right? So my first moment in time with an Apple II was back in 1980, and that basically led me to decide to do this presentation and tell you my experiences and try to help anybody else out there that wants to do the same thing. So I'm going to take you back through time. Who am I? It's a question I ask myself a lot, actually. 43 years in computing, and one of the funny things I put on this slide was the first time I saw an Apple computer, period, was in Mrs. McIntosh's class. So that hit me one day. And when I saw it, it was the back of the machine that I remember. It's kind of a strange story, but the Disk 2 had a ribbon cable back then that was multicolored. And I still want one of those. I was hoping I'd get one in the garage giveaway. Obviously, I could go out and make that cable, but I haven't gone that far yet. I probably might at some point. Oregon Trail and lemonade stand were some things that I remember. And the first computer I actually used was a TRS-80. And so, actually the first computer I ever saw was a TRS-80. And so one of the things I remember is that the Apple II looked different, right? Like I said, that color, that just something about it, right? The Disk 2 was mystical to me at the time. And so I gravitated to it. Little did I know that apparently I did well, myself and another kid named Derek, did really well in the 3rd grade. And we got picked from our math scores, 2 highest kids in elementary school, to be part of an experimental program. So in the 4th grade, I got to actually touch one and see the insides. And Mr. Weinbrenner at the time, our computer teacher who used to travel from building to building back in those days, he told us something that I'll never forget, which was, you're going to learn something that probably most people aren't going to be able to help you with, including your parents. And I just thought that was really cool. So that really hooked me into this stuff. And I think I've been on this journey ever since, and I can't get away from it. And when I come here, I want to just keep doing it even more because I love the people here and I really enjoyed the interaction. I was a president of an Apple II user group at one point, a PC user group, and then I hung out at HamFest. Went to several of those, wherever they were, because if you remember, I don't know how many of you ever went to HamFest or know what I'm talking about, ham radio. Tons of computer stuff there back in the day, tons of electronics. I mean, you'd find almost anything you were looking for. It was like a dream for people that like technology and just screwing around with stuff. A lot of homebrew stuff, that mentality. So basically, I picked up a lot of stuff, and I've done a lot of things over the years with that. As far as, experimenting, I actually destroyed a JCPenney TV one time. It had a digital interface on it, and I wanted it to be analog for my 2GS when I got it, and that's another story for another day. But another thing I was part of back in the day, back in the late 80s, a friend of mine named Joshua Thompson was working on a bulletin board system and called Future Vision. So we were doing that back in the day with Usenet, and we actually had a BBS in Alaska, and I was in Detroit, and we're doing all kinds of fun stuff. MacHack Conference. So I see some parallels and some similarities between that spirit of enthusiasm between that conference and this one. So I was really looking forward to coming here and trying to relive some of that, because that's something I did for many years. I was a volunteer and turned into a staff member for a while. Quality Computers. Who remembers Quality Computers? Oh, yeah. I worked there for 6 months back in the 80s. And I actually then went and worked for an Apple dealer for 2 years, and I'm going to show you something I still have from those days that paid it forward. And currently I'm with Stellantis. All right, that's enough of the shameless self-promotion. That's the terminology we used to use in our conference I used to go to. Machines that I sold and owned. So I've bought and sold a lot of things. My parents bought some things, and then I just kind of went crazy. It got to a point where Apple was actually paying me to upgrade. It's kind of a long story, but when I worked at an Apple dealer, you could buy things out of parts. The Apple dealers were required to buy a certain amount of parts to have on stock, but they let me buy them, and I'd build a Mac 2FX for under price, turn around and sell it, and get the next machine. And I kept doing that, and it was a lot of fun. I miss those days. But of all the things that I've had up here, that's the one I've never had. Okay, so why? I gave you a little bit of background kind of as to why. Shiny, smooth keys. So anytime I'd ever see an Apple II Plus in recent times, I would see them with the flat keys, right? And it was just kind of like, that's not the one I remember. So I'm like, I've been on this quest to find, something with shiny keys. Turns out that that's the Datanetics keyboard for the most part, although there might be one exception, and I am definitely not an expert on this subject. I've learned a lot in the last few months, but one thing I know is I'm not an expert on everything. And so I believe there's a version of the Alps keyboard that actually uses those shiny keys, but it's kind of an oddball situation. The reset key. I didn't realize, I learned that in the last couple of years, that you can flip that switch. So I thought you had to have an original Apple II in order to do just reset, which was very annoying if you're in the middle of something and accidentally hit it, which is probably why Apple put that switch in there. But I realized that the 2 Plus can do that. So that was cool when I found that out. Raised power light. I definitely remember it. Very rare these days to get one, at least under probably $500 just for the keyboard alone, which drives me nuts. The price for this stuff is, especially if you say original Apple II, I swear to God, it doesn't matter if someone stomped on it and beat on it with a hammer. They're going to find a way. Someone's going to buy it for something ridiculously overpriced. Like I saw one on eBay just in the last week go for like I believe it was $2,000. It wasn't even tested. I'm like, seriously? But anyway, that's just my perspective. It's just one man's perspective. Boot into Integer Basic without System Master, yes. Because I still have my original floppy, as you can see down there. I even know the date because I wrote it on there. I was so proud of it. Nothing like buying your first floppy disk, right, at an Apple dealer. So that disk still works. And when we originally had it, it booted into Integer Basic directly. There was no System Master or anything. But I remember we changed it because the school upgraded and things happened. So those rainbow colored disk cables, I remember that. And then the magical red switch. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the firmware card. So Apple had a firmware card and it had this little switch. Except when I was a kid at school, I just knew there was a red switch in the back of the machine. And of course it was so tempting, right? So I flipped it. But it doesn't take effect until you power on and power back off. So let's just say the next kid that came to use the machine started saying that something wasn't right, but they knew, because of that special program back in the 4th grade, I think this was like 5th grade, they knew that I knew about stuff. Of course, I didn't admit to my crime. Now I'm admitting to it how many years later, but anyway. So that was a funny memory. So I know I had to have one of those. I had to have one of those. Don't need it, as it turns out, but I had to have it. And then the only Apple II, again, we only had one Apple II at the beginning, and then we had a 2 Plus. So just that memory of trying to get time with this thing, right? Because my parents couldn't afford it. We couldn't. It was too expensive at the time. So I had to stay after school to use it. And the memories of that somehow are luring me back to this thing, even though, like you've seen, I've owned a ton of machines and gotten rid of stuff over time. So it doesn't really make any sense, except, hey. So these are the first Apple II programs I remember. Those are the ones I saw on the Apple II. Okay. Yes. Yes, that's what it said. I'm not making it up.
Wow.
This machine, I had the URL to it up here. I put it up there. That way, if we paste the presentation online, you can go see where assuming I put it up in the right format, but you can probably find that URL. It's probably gone because eBay, as I was just talking to somebody yesterday, is getting rid of this stuff in 90 days. So in 90 days, you can't see this stuff, but it's true, 12,000. I know the guy that sold this, or at least I knew who he was, and I ended up talking to him. I tried to get him to tell me, is that true? And he won't answer me, but anyway. The point is, it said it sold for 12,000. The point is, anything of that expense, in my opinion, is just ridiculous. But again, that's my opinion. So again, keyboard number 1, that raised power light, boots to integer basic, non-auto start versus auto start. So I don't know if you know what original Apple II did. Well, it didn't do that. There's a reason for that, and you'll see in a minute. But pretend this isn't happening right now, but that is what it did. And basically, you did Control B, and you got an integer prompt. And you can run software. As I found out, you don't need, if it's using assembly, it doesn't care what basic's in there. It's doing some funny stuff. We'll leave it for entertainment value. But it's because I did some stuff to it. We'll talk about that in a minute. But anyway, that was the original experience. I honestly don't remember if that's what we had in school. It doesn't seem like we did, but if we didn't have, we might have had the auto start ROM, and that's probably what so. Okay, DOS 3.2, and of course, up to Rev 7 is kind of considered that breaking point for when it kind of starts becoming not an Apple II, but we'll talk about that too. Okay, how did I do it? I'm talking about a couple things here. So somebody offered me the chance to purchase an original Apple II for $1,000. It looked really good, except that deal didn't really work out. And I said, I'm going to keep looking. So what did I do? I wasted a lot of time on eBay is what I did. And I searched over and over and over again. And I finally came across, well, my criteria is this. Let me back up a second here. So searching for Apple II. So that shiny key thing I was telling you about. I didn't know at the time it was Datanetics, but I just knew it was shiny keys. So I was looking for that. I found a listing that wasn't quite right because I figured, I'll take a chance. And I kind of watched it because I'm like, well, no one else wants it either. At least I hoped. Turns out that wasn't exactly the case. Had a Rev 3 motherboard in it. I got lucky. Not entirely, because I also knew to look for the memory jumpers, and I'll show you those too. Found that out recently, that the memory blocks were on the Rev 4 and back. They are soldered on the Rev 4, but not on the Rev 3. But if you look at an eBay ad, you're not going to be able to tell if they're soldered or not. It's too tiny of a tolerance. Shipping, yes, that's a big problem. This machine, I got it for $212 in the auction, but the shipping was 1/3. So shipping was like $120 because it was in Los Angeles. Turns out I worked with the seller and she was able to get it down for me. But that is a consideration, because if you go and look for something and you don't think about the shipping, then it hits you and you're like, As far as the best offer, I did that. So they had it up as an auction or a best offer. I made the best offer thinking maybe that would work for $100. No, it didn't. At the last minute, somebody, I swear the last 30 minutes, I couldn't believe it. Somebody came along and decided that they were going to give me a challenge, although we were doing it in like $7 increments. It was kind of silly. And I got it. I was like, no, you're not going to get it. I hate auctions, by the way. I'm not an auction person, but I managed to win this one. Okay. Yes, this was in the picture. I am not joking. The relevance of this, there isn't, right? This shouldn't even have been up here. These chips were not keeping the machine from being functional. The seller had no clue. but I'm sure that turned off people. It's an opportunity, and that's what I'm trying to point out. There's opportunities out there if you look for them. This is what some of the pictures look like on eBay. Turns out that, of course, the person that shipped it had no clue and stuffed it in the machine between the slots and sent it to me. And I'm like, no, no. Turns out it didn't do any damage, but chances you take. Original box. I was going to bring that down and I forgot about it, and you probably all have seen an original box, but maybe you haven't. It's kind of cool. I never had an original box for an Apple II. I used to see that. I remember seeing that in the shelf in the school. So, cost of just the machine itself. There's that $120, but by the time we got to it, she refunded me $26. It wasn't a heck of a lot, but point is that. Keep that in mind. Okay, 2 + 2 extras. So, of course, when you get your Apple II, you can't just stop there, right? Because if you did, you would just have a showpiece to put on your table, coffee table. So I decided I was going to get myself an 80-column card. I don't know how many of you remember those, but this is a ViewMaster. This is better than the Videx card as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't need the little switch, and it loops through to your NTSC display. Then it also gives you pretty good quality NTSC for text only. It's not going to do graphics. So you put it in slot 3, and you can use it with software. You can even do a PR number 3, and you can literally do a Control A, and you get lowercase. So if that's where you want to get your lowercase from, you can do it. You don't have to go and spend any more money. However, I did. I kept going. So with some of my savings, I decided to get a Romex, and that's part of what you're seeing there. Is, of course, you get your original-looking computer, and then you upgrade it, right? It's not so original anymore, but this is the stuff we do, and I like to have fun. Firmware card, we talked about that. Language card. So what's interesting is, if you have integer basic ROMs or you have AppleSoft ROMs on the motherboard, either one of those, you have the ability to, with a language card, to load either basic. So that's something to keep in mind either. You don't have to have the integer basic ROMs, and you don't have to have the AppleSoft ROMs if you get a language card. And those language cards are pretty cheap on eBay or on the Facebook Marketplace or other places like that. Data analytics key switches, I bought some of those from a guy named Larry Pell. I'll show you this, his name here shortly, or his information on eBay. I decided to get a 128K card because Petr Piskaric did a really cool session. I think it was, I don't know what year it was, last year, I'm not sure. But it was running AppleWorks on an Apple II. I said, that sounds like something cool I got to do. I haven't had the time to actually run the software because you need some special software to modify AppleWorks to make it work. But with that little Saturn card, you can do it. And so my point here is, for $368 on my extras, yeah, I know, more than the machine. Okay, I admit to my crimes as well. I'm still under $1,000. That's my point here. And like I said, I got more than I would have otherwise. Okay, one of the things I wanted to point out, and this is kind of my point, what I'm building up to here. An Apple II is also available. This is an original Apple ad. I believe this is 1977. Don't quote me on it, but I believe it is. It says an Apple II is available in board only. Now, the point I'm trying to make is there's a little bit of a loose definition or a little bit of leeway here. If an original Apple II was originally just a board, then the case shouldn't matter as much. That's what I'm trying to say. I know the purists out there. I know. But I'm just saying, if it makes you feel any better when you want to get your 2 Plus instead of the 2 and make it look like one, this is a good point to keep in mind because I didn't even know this. Okay, how did I get to the raised power light? Don't ask me what this is all about. I told him don't send me one of those. I don't want it. And this is a family-oriented thing, so you can see it's blotted out there. But the raised power light, this is a 3D print, and I'll show it to you in a minute. 3D print.
Is it resin?
Yeah, I'll show it to you. Nameplate. Yes, it's true. Yes, that's where it's coming from. So there is shipping, unfortunately. But he claims that's what it looks like. I have no experience with that. I don't know if anybody else around here has done that, but you can get a plate. So for $35, and I forgot to put that on there. I think I put it on the other slide. And for another, 23 plus 16, you too can say Apple II with a raised power light. However, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but not much. Okay. Again, some points. The 2 and the 2 Plus were offered for the sale at the same time. I did not know that until recently. You could technically order an Apple II in 1982. I don't know who would do that, but you could do it. Integer basic ROMs. They're still on eBay, but they're getting harder to find. I paid $90, as I showed, for the integer basic ROMs, only to realize that I should have put that money into a ROMX. And I'll show you that if I don't run out of time, which I think I'm going to. But anyway, the earlier Apple IIs, as I mentioned, have the shiny keys, the data index keyboards. And I showed you that. That was $35, the badge. And again, these were just-in-time machines. So that's an interesting point. Just because it's an Apple II or a 2 Plus doesn't mean the innards are what you would necessarily expect. And of course, keep in mind that people swap things as things broke, right? So you may or may not get what you're thinking by just looking at the cover. Can't judge an Apple II by its cover. True and not true. But your mileage will vary. But you really have to pay attention. And the bottom sticker, oh my goodness. I can't tell you how many advertisements I've seen, right? Or sales on eBay I've seen where people are showing the sticker and going crazy over it. And like, really? But anyway. Okay, let's take a look here. So, Apple II motherboard revisions. This came from the Understanding the Apple II, which I highly recommend that. It's on archive.org, and I included a link in this presentation. Awesome guide. I mean, just pages of detail that will just blow your mind. But basically, the author in 1982 said he had never seen these other revisions. I believe that some people have seen them, some of these that he didn't see. That was a long time ago. This is all the different things that happened. Most of it was around video, as I was telling someone earlier, that to get this to even display, I had to come down here at midnight the other night when no one was here, and I had to play with that projector, and I had to put it in Antoine Vigneault, if you know who he is, might be proud. I had to put it in CCAM, which is a French standard. I don't understand why. It shouldn't happen. But the NTSC on this motherboard, oh my goodness, it's a Rev 3 motherboard, and it's horrible. So anyway, you can read about some of these other changes. Revision points. And this is just on the RFI. So RFI is later. You're talking like 1981, 82. Reactive Micro sells a board. He calls it Rev 7 RFI. And so I asked Henry, if anybody knows Henry Corbis, I said, Henry, why are you calling it Rev 7 RFI? I didn't know this. I've been enlightened recently. And he basically said, well, that's because people know it that way. I'm like, but it's wrong. It's either Rev 7 or it's RFI, because there was no Rev 7 RFI. Anyway, there's that label madness. How can you do the same? So basically, scan daily, waste a lot of time. 4 ROMs in a row. And I was going to show you a quick picture of that if I can. So,
Like 5 minutes.
oh, 5 minutes? Okay. It's not showing on the projector. Oh, okay. Oh, well. Yeah. It's because my screen is not mirrored. Anyway, the bottom line is that there's 4 ROMs in a row. If you see 4 ROMs in a row and then 2 spaces, it's going to be integer basic. So these are some real quick, you don't have to be knowledgeable about all the part numbers. You don't have to know all that detail. But if you typically see a motherboard where there's only 4 in a row, it could be AppleSoft and someone pulled them out. That would happen at the garage giveaway. But typically, you would not have that issue on true Apple IIs. But but you never know. Memory select jumpers, talked a little bit about that. The board stuffing date in the upper left-hand corner. That's a little goofy, but there's some consistency for some of the revisions. Some of the motherboards, for quite a while, you would have 7911, which meant 1979, and then the week. That's the stuffing date. That's not the date the machine was manufactured. We talked about some of these other things. And we talked about resources. This is all the things that I've tried to note where I've gotten a lot of this information and material. And then the last thing, because we're short on time. So I'm going to do a quick change here. And I'm going to put the ROMX in the machine and just show you what it can do for you. Because I do think this is an awesome value. And Jeff Mazur, who's in California, I don't know what city, sorry, and Dean, who's in Australia somewhere, Claxton, put this thing together. They did it, I believe, for the 2E first. And then they did the okay. So you want a ROM? You got it. Whatever ROM you want. Not only that, you can upload the ROMs. And so Joe Snowstrider, who was talking yesterday, he did a YouTube video on this back in 2020, I believe. He did not have, at that time, I don't think he had the older revision, or I should say they didn't have the older revision available and he didn't have one. So they now have it for the Rev 6 and back. Because if you know anything about the motherboard and you know anything about the character ROM basically is small on the older motherboards, and you had to use a Dan Paymar type lowercase chip to be able to swap back and forth between two ROMs to get lowercase. With this thing, I got it. Awesome. And if you want that experience, I don't have the language card in here. Remember that when I started at the beginning of this presentation? So integer no auto, 5, I can do it. I don't have to swap anything. I don't get any R's on the screen, but I do get a little prompt, Control B. There you go. And that's my presentation. I think pretty much in a nutshell. Any questions? Do we have time for questions? Or
Like one question, maybe?
anybody have any questions? So anyway.
You gotta let us know if you ever get the paper backing off of your old.
Well, and that's what I wanted to show. I didn't do it really, and I'm out of time, but.
Hey, Chris, I'm gonna need like 3 or 4 minutes. Yep, no problem.
But yeah, I can show this to you guys later. But this is the raised power light, and I just stuffed some cardboard in it. And I've got an original label from when I worked at an Apple dealer.
Just one question here.
Yeah, did you come across any problem with memory chips, other custom chips?
Memory chips, they're 4164s. Those seem to be very plentiful.
And they're all socketed?
Everything on this machine is socketed to my knowledge. I don't think there's anything that's not socketed. Other than, like I said, those memory jumpers, but those really don't matter.
Let's see, Jeff Maracini. I have not tried around X. Has it dramatically improved the usability? No, it just makes it fun. I wouldn't. Booting an Apple One mode I thought was pretty awesome, and trying to learn how to use an Apple One. It's a bit challenging. I've never done that before because I've never had an Apple One and I've never used an Apple One emulator. But no, it's just it's an amazing product considering that they're going back to Rev 0, right? I don't know how these guys get a hold of this hardware. I don't know how they do this, but they deserve a lot of credit for something that works on a Rev 3 motherboard, which is what I have. So no, just lots of fun, lots of fun. We do, if you're in that channel, there's Huxley has posted a really awesome. I said he's the next person to use a Prezo for Kansas or 2024, KansasFest 2024. He took his original Apple II to Apple headquarters and to the visitor center, and was demoing it. I'm loving this. So that's a great side chat here going on. So if you got some time, you can join in. But no, just a lot of fun. A lot of memories. So looks like we're running out of time. I don't want to be rude to the next presenter, but we'll continue in the Discord here. Love the opportunity. Thank you again to all the volunteers that work in your, whatever you want to call it's off. Paul and Chris and Kat, hopefully she's feeling better. Javier, Sean, well, some missing out there. There's somebody else I've missed, I'm sure. But anyway, just thank you.